You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 169. Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast. Discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, optimal performance, and building a purposeful life and fulfilling career. I'm your host, violinist, and certified performance and life coach for musicians, Dr. René-Paul Gauthier. Hello, everyone. As always, I hope this episode finds you doing well. I have a fantastic guest for you this week on the show. I'm very excited about today's episode because I get to bring you an absolutely brilliant mind in our industry, the wonderful, insightful, and innovative Susanna Klein. But before I bring her, I have a few questions for you. Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions, but you're not making real progress? Like no matter how much you practice, you're not seeing the results you want. Maybe you feel like you've hit a wall in your career and you don't know how to take the next step to land that dream job. And what about those auditions? Have you ever walked into an audition feeling like you've done everything you can to prepare, but things just fell apart once you started playing? Or you thought you did great maybe, but you didn't advance to the next round and you cannot figure out what to do differently next time. Maybe you get tight and tense when you're performing, even though you've worked really hard to prepare. Or maybe you get overwhelmed with negative thoughts and self-doubt that hold you back from giving your best performance. Sometimes it feels like we're our own worst enemy, right? I hear you. I've been there. It's a tough mental game, and it can be incredibly frustrating to put in so much effort and not see the results you want. And then what do? It's easy to get lost in the weeds of practicing, working on the same things over and over without a clear direction. I call that the downward spiral of desperation practicing, and that can lead to feeling like you're not making any real progress. And then there's performance preparation. What most people don't realize is that preparing for performances is not the same as practicing. It's a completely different approach. We need performance training, conditioning methods, and the right kind of mind management so we're fully prepared, ready to go, and in the right headspace to perform. There's a lot to think about. So tell me, are you currently on the audition path? Are you aiming for that elusive first position? Or maybe you're striving to level up your musical career. What do you think it would take you to deliver a winning audition, to get that dream position, to create your ideal life? Well, if you're looking for real solutions and for the guidance that will lift you up there, I invite you to join the Music Mastery Experience, my life-changing group coaching program. The Music Mastery Experience is the most comprehensive, life-changing, highly personalized group coaching program for musicians in existence. Together, we're going to dive in deep and understand the stumbling blocks that are getting in your way. We're going to figure out how they were created. We're going to untangle all of it and create a powerful strategy that is tailored to your needs so you can deliver your best audition yet and perform with confidence time and time again. The Music Mastery Experience is going to provide you with a comprehensive approach to peak performance. We're going to cover everything you need, from effective practicing techniques to performance preparation and conditioning methods that will transform how you perform. Plus, you're going to get powerful life coaching that will support you in making big strides in your musical journey and achieve your goals in life. No more wasting time or feeling frustrated. The tools and guidance you're going to receive in the Music Mastery Experience are going to save you from unnecessary agony. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you money, energy, and effort, and it's going to help you achieve the results you want. So don't miss out. Visit the Music Mastery Experience now to get all the details about the program and book your free conversation with me so we can plan how to make all of this your new reality now. You're going to get to rock your auditions and you will grow your career. So book your free call now at mindoverfinger.com/MME and let's take your music making to the next level. I cannot wait to speak with you. And I just have to share with you the DM one of my Music Mastery Experience participants sent me a few days ago. She said, I'm living my dream because of all of the work I did in your program. I really appreciate you and your guidance. I have continued to use the tools you introduced me to in all aspects of my life. I use the foundation you gave me every day, and I tell many people about your course and how you helped me to completely change my life. Wow, no need to tell you that this made my day. And this type of transformation is possible for you now. So let's you and I talk and strategize to make all of this happen for you. Again, all of the info and link to book your free conversation with me is at mindoverfinger.com/MME. And of course, I have all of this in the show notes for you. Okay, let's dive into this week's conversation. Susanna Klein is Associate Professor of Violin at Virginia Commonwealth University. She's also a tech entrepreneur, a practice researcher, and the author of the acclaimed Practisma Practice Journal. She presents workshops nationally on empowered practice psychology and transformative habit building, and she writes fantastic articles for many publications, including violinist.com, Strings Magazine, and The Strat Online. Her mission is to make practice insightful and delightful for all. And as you know, I really resonate with this. I'm so happy that Susanna and I finally put down some time in the calendar to meet and chat. And I wish we had had 3 more hours because we could have kept going, believe me. Had such a great time. And we covered many topics, including performance training, empowerment, a mindful approach to practicing and making music, as well as her work and research in the field. I feel like Susanna and I really speak the same language, and I think you're going to walk away from this episode motivated and inspired and with much food for thoughts and experimentation in the practice room in the days to come. All right, I hope you enjoy. Let's go to the show. Wonderful. Susanna Klein, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's great to meet you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Susanna, you're a multifaceted artist and educator, to say the least. And I've mentioned several of your accomplishments and activities in the introduction, but I think that my listeners would love to hear your story from your perspective. So can you please share with us your musical journey and how your artistic path has unfolded?
Sure. How far do you want me to go back? Like teenager?
As far as you would like.
Um, okay, let's see. I'll start with my teenage years because they do have to do with sort of where I ended up now. In high school, I was much more into athletics than I was into music. And I practiced, some, not a lot. And I wasn't going to be a musician. I really wanted to study medicine or something to do with movement. And then I went to Allstate. I can't remember, my sophomore or junior year, Allstate Orchestra. And a camp in North Carolina, I guess, had gotten the Allstate list. And so I got this letter in the mail that said, because you've been to Maryland Allstate, we want to give you a half scholarship to this camp, this summer. You don't need to audition. And I was like, great, I'll be right there. So it just kind of, fell into my lap. And so this was then the summer before my senior year. And I went, and this was in Boone, North Carolina. There was a side-by-side with the North Carolina Symphony. And in an instant, in that first rehearsal, in this side-by-side, hearing this incredible sound around me, I was like, ding, oops, I have to become a musician. And I think a lot of people have this kind of story where it's like there's a kind of trigger. And for me, it was very sudden, but it was also very late because I hadn't been serious, And so then I started practicing like crazy. And but I think I carried forward a considerable amount of, I don't know, what I like to call a little, ugly duckling syndrome
Mm.
of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. I think everybody has this to a degree, but I think because of the way that my life sort of unfolded, I really felt that. And then I did, I went to music school. I went to VCU, actually, where I teach now. I like to say I've gone nowhere, in 4 years or something, but really I've returned home. Um, Practiced like a fiend, really self-abusive practicer, I think, many, many hours, never taking a day off. Um, had a difficult journey, actually had a difficult journey with my teacher there because we were butting heads often. Um, Went to summer camp every summer, then went to BU for my graduate degree for my master's and studied with Roman Totenberg, who was, I like to call him my personal savior,
Mm.
who just really did so much, not just for my playing, but really for my head, which at that point was really kind of messed up and underconfident. And like I said, I don't know if self-abusive is too strong, but I was not a positive musician. I was very addicted to music and I practiced a lot. I was very disciplined, but I was not very optimistic or confident or joyous, which are all things that, you know, help the journey if you want to stay in it and help you perform. And then because I was still underconfident, I thought I'll never get a job playing. I was doing some gigs, obviously, in Boston, but I still thought, I'm just not good enough. I was really interested in music history, like that was a passion of mine. So I thought I should go to graduate school and get a PhD in music history and become a musicologist. And I took 2.5 years for my master's instead of two. And so I had the kind of a semester, of nothing. And so in that fall, I just sort of for kicks took an audition with the New Jersey Symphony. And I, to my great surprise, made it to semifinals, um, which I think is a little bit of beginner's luck. You're just like, oh, okay, well, it's okay, whatever happens here. And then I, was thinking, wait a minute, like if I'm really that bad, why would I advance, in a national audition? So then I took a audition for a temporary position with the Memphis Symphony that started in January, and I got that job. And again, I was just thinking this is a fill-in. I'll really go to musicology school. I applied at all those PhD programs. But once again, just like when I was in high school, once I was surrounded by the professional sound every day, I was like, I can't not do this. I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in Memphis for a year, and then I went back and started my DMA again with Roman Totenberg. Because I knew I wasn't done developing. I mean, now I know we're never done, but at the time I thought there was this magic little level that I had to get to. Started my DMA, then I veered off. I started playing viola a lot, joined a string quartet, lots of things happened. But the short version of that story is that I quit graduate school. I quit my DMA about halfway through because I got a job with the Richmond Symphony. And I knew Richmond and Virginia very well because that's where I had gone to school as an undergrad. Played there for about 3.5 years. Then I got a job with the Colorado Symphony, moved out there, realized I didn't like being in the middle of the country or far away from family. My family is like East Coast, or Germany is the other half of my family. And then re-auditioned for principal second in Richmond, and through magic and lots of other things, whatever, got that, came back to Richmond. That was the third time then that I was living in this town. Fast forward, blah blah blah, injury, lots of shoulder problems, started really having a lot of problems with my body on the job, and started looking then for other opportunities, like, if I'm not going to be playing 6 hours a day, what could I be doing? And a couple years later, this job came open at VCU for full-time violin professor and string coordinator. And a little bit again of kind of sheer willpower. I have this sort of habit of doubling down when it's most necessary, even when some other times I can't do it. And so I started that job at VCU in 2008, and that's where I've been, like, for 15 years basically, as a violin professor, and doing lots of other things. In terms of the context that you kind of know me in, which is sort of the psychology of practice space, how that started was really started with the 2011 Cinderella run of the VCU basketball team. They were not
This
expected
is
to do.
not what I was expecting.
Yeah, do you know that story? They were like not on
Mm-mm.
the radar at all, and I think they were like a, what is that, like a lottery pick, or I can't remember what it's called, but there's a certain number of teams that get in at the end just by their record, like even though so they were completely unseeded and made it to the final four. And because I'm a big sports fan, I was following them. And Shaka Smart, their coach, really delves into psychology with his players. He has a minor in psychology. And so I started reading up on, him and all this stuff. And it brought back all this sports stuff that I was doing in high school, what my coaches were doing, what we were reading, the fact that we were journaling, all this stuff sort of started coming back to me. And I wrote a grant at the university. It was a teaching grant, actually, like what music can learn from sports.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, started doing all this work. In the beginning, for me, it was a quest for like, how can we be more efficient? How can my students be excellent quicker, right? Because I thought that's what we all want. And so we started journaling. We did a lot of performance training with like heart rate monitors and really explaining to people the science. Did a lot of technology experiments. We got in the motion lab. VCU has a motion capture lab, that they use for like animated movies, so that violinists could see themselves essentially just as a stick figure or an avatar rather than themselves. Eventually, I created an app for research where we did a big human study at other universities about practice habits and what makes people feel empowered and efficient. A lot of writing, a lot of workshops. And my quest in the beginning was always excellence. And what I came away with over and over and over again was that people were really, really unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
Like just whenever I would do something, it was like, wow, the takeaway here is that people are actually not happy. And I don't mean just, oh, they're having a bad day, but really feeling lots of shame, lots of discouragement, um, lots of inner battles, not feeling worthy. And I know all those things really well from my own life, but I think I always thought it was just me.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was sort of in the research field watching others and getting them to report back that I could see this is really systemic. So, from there, I mean, I still am doing lots of research, but I really wanted to start doing something and giving people tools for feeling more empowered on their journey and feeling more joy in the process and being more forgiving, having more positive self-talk. Like I wanted it to be applicable, all the
Yeah.
work, especially that I did with my students. So when the Practisma journal came out, which you were mentioning earlier, that was really the culmination of like 8 years of journaling with my students and learning a lot of times by failure or luck by success, what leads to feelings of empowerment or
Mm-hmm.
what leads to breakthroughs or what doesn't, right? So in the beginning, like we did a lot of recording prompts. Record yourself, record your lesson, listen back, lots of things. And even though things were highly efficient, a lot of times I was making people less happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were feeling worse about themselves because of the way that I was writing the prompts. And then other times I would then revise and I would write prompts like, today record 3 spots, each of the spots 3 times. Record, listen back, record again, listen back, record again, like a recording sandwich. And then they loved recording because they could see, since I was telling them you must record, each spot 3 times, they could see their progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas before, when I said, record yourself, they only listened to that first draft. They got discouraged. They practiced. They certainly were more targeted in their work, but they were also draining their empowerment. So now kind of, my, I don't know, raison d'être, if you will, is like really talking to musicians and institutions about balancing and cultivating efficiency, empowerment, and joy in practice.
Mm.
Um, yes, you can have, certainly sometimes you have to be more efficient and less joyful. Sometimes you should be more joyful and perhaps less efficient, right? Just blow through some old music, have some fun. Um, Empowerment, I think, always has to be in there in the mix, but there are ways to cultivate those. It's been scientifically researched. Like there's a lot of information on there about how to create habits that are more empowered. Because
Mhm.
when we get on stage or when we have a difficult day, we have to draw on that. So, that for me now is sort of the three-legged stool of what I try to preach about, and what all my research is about. It's essentially kind of all psychology oriented.
Yeah. What a beautiful journey. And thank you so much for sharing. I was taking some notes as you were talking. I find it so fascinating how um, that idea of joy comes back again and again. And I think that as they listen to your journey, the listeners can relate to so many things. I think a lot of people have similar experience in terms of, that ugly duckling syndrome that you talk about, and maybe a difficult relationship with a teacher, that self-abusing side. I think
Mhm.
we all have it to a certain degree, and for some of us, it becomes absolutely debilitating. Absolutely. And that idea that how joy is at the essence of everything. I love when you were talking about quest, and that principle of the simultaneous discoveries, when you have people who have never met and have completely different paths but somehow get to same conclusions. As you were talking, I feel that you and I have this. And as we were saying right before I started recording this, I wish we meet in person very soon. We're going to have hours
Yeah.
to discuss, because for me, it also started as a quest to this thirst I had to really help my students progress better, and did my research and doctoral dissertation on this deep practice model that I developed. And the more I did the research, the more I realized they were not happy. And the big mindset that was emerging as a result of all of this was that mindset of self respect, of self compassion, and that importance. And as my work continued to evolve and I started coaching for performance, I realized the humans I'm coaching are hurting. And
Hmm.
that's when I really got into the life coaching certification, and really seeing how I think your work, my work, and the work of many of our colleagues, if we can really push in that direction, it can really change the scene of the classical music world. If we can spread that word much more about how happy human beings make not only better musicians, but a much better musical world. I think
I,
that is very
I agree.
powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess I used to think that excellence would make me happy, right? So I thought for a long time, oh, I'm unhappy because I'm not sure I can have a job. And then I had a job. And then I thought, I'm not happy because I don't have what I considered, a good job. I need a better job, and then I got a better job. And this feeling that, my inner dialogue just accompanied me wherever I went.
Mm,
Because the fact is, like, you're never good enough, right? I mean, I'm never going to be, I don't know, Nicola Benedetti, right? Like, there's always something else to aspire to.
mhm,
That's part of the musician's quest. But I think it's a, yeah, I think it's a fallacy that excellence will make you happy. Not to say that
absolutely.
it's not a worthy goal and that it doesn't play a big part in excellence. Um, and happy is maybe not the right word, and joy, I use joy a lot, but it's also maybe not the right word, but it's, being somewhat at peace,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
being able to deal with, the huge disappointments that come in music and the very exciting challenges and the celebrations, and, being accepting that whole roller coaster ride more,
Yeah.
and being able to parse out, oh, I did this very well in this performance. I was really proud of, I don't know, for me it would be like staying physically free and being emotional, you know. I'm not so happy I missed these notes, but like I'm very happy with this part of it.
Yeah.
Just being able to get to that point, I think, um, is important. And I do think it can be practiced like everything else. I think
Yeah.
empowerment, the way that we work influences the way that we feel.
100%. I believe that. 100%. Yeah. I really like the idea that Byron Katie talks about of being at home with oneself. I think that that's what I aspire to is
Yeah.
really
And it's a
uh
lifelong project, it just like being an excellent musician. It's never like, oh, great, I have arrived.
yeah.
It's a lifelong endeavor. What I find in music that is so strange to me now that am reading all these books and I've done all this research, is that, like, compared to sports especially, there's not a whole industry around it. There are not
Mhm.
tons of books. I mean, there's Musician's Way, and Don Green's work is really important. um, but if you look at sports models, I mean, it's like sports coaches, sports psychologists. I mean, you can actually get a degree in this, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole sort of acknowledgement of the difficulty, the personal difficulties that people can feel in these like elite endeavors. And, we're just at the very, very beginning of it.
Yeah.
Um, and,
I
and
agree
what
with
that,
you.
yeah, and what that does is that people feel like, well, or at least I felt like there must be something wrong with me.
Mhm.
I'm feeling these things because I'm not dedicated enough, or I don't practice enough, or I don't get it. I'm not talented enough. I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
Um,
We think
and
that we're
then
sort of doomed by a condition when in fact we are conditioned by our past experience, our surroundings. I just finished a workshop called the Performance Anxiety Solution where I was
nice.
discussing this,
Yeah.
how the fact that the things we experience today are results of the things that were in the past. And unless we're very intentional about the way we reprogram our mind, then we just repeat more of the same patterns. But we want to make sure we bring this self respect and this self love and compassion in the work with us. Then everything
Yeah.
is,
And also the science. I don't know how you feel about this, but like when I've worked with people on performance anxiety, and as you know, when we work with others, we're really working with ourselves as
yes.
well, right? But because I do a lot of research with the Department of Engineering at VCU and the medical school. And now when I talk about performance anxiety, I get very sciency. Here's
Hmm.
adrenaline. Here's what it does in your body, right?
Yeah.
Here's what your brain does. This is your left brain having chatter, or this is your right brain holistic. Um, Showing people, like hooking them up to heart monitors, making them nervous, and then letting the class kind of see the what happens to the heart rate. Like, it's actually incredibly empowering to people because it's fact based.
Yeah.
It's not, voodoo. I mean, there is a lot of stuff that we have to do in the empowerment space. How do we chill that chatter? How do we create arcs of positive memory, that we can draw on when we perform? But there's also a lot of stuff that's just reassuring to people, like there's a thing called I think it's called the pre-arousal heart rate, but basically before something happens that we're afraid of or that's important, the heart rate will really spike, right? It just goes sky high. And then as soon as we actually start doing the activity, the heart rate will come down. And
Yeah.
it's 98% of the time, right? So before you and I came on this Zoom interview, I was sitting here a little nervous, working the technology. That's probably when my heart rate was the highest. And then once we start talking, it actually goes down a little bit. Once I knew that, it made me feel a lot better about performing, because I knew that backstage feeling is actually the worst in terms of
Yeah.
the physiological effects, right? And then as soon as I start playing, it's actually going to get better. And it
Yeah.
took that fear away of, what if I continue to get so nervous that I just completely come unglued and I have to walk off stage? Like, I think my nerves, it's not just being nervous, but just knowing, actually, just physiologically speaking, your heart rate will start to come down a bit.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree with you. We we talked about this in the workshop, how it's that physiological chain of events that's triggered by this event. And then for me, I like to call this the activation because the body is doing its job. There's something's about to happen, so the body wants you to be alert and fast and optimized.
Yes, that's a
So
great word.
there's all of these hormones running through your body, all these chemicals, but anxiety starts when you make that mean that something's wrong.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah.
Pathologizing. When in
Yes.
fact everything is right. Everything is right. It's just you're not used to that overwhelming effect, you know?
Yes.
Or
And that's what conditioning does when you mentioned that as you do this work with your students of recording and performing, and I'm sure you do um, adversity training, all of these things, is when you learn how to perform in that state of activation, then
yeah.
that's
I mean,
when,
my students at VCU, I just tell them every recital, because there a lot of times there's a lot of nerves backstage, and I'm like, it's okay. It's just a draft. This is just our first draft. We're not here to be perfect. We're here to find out what happens to me with this piece under pressure.
yeah,
It's just all part of, this is like your lab book, rather than this performance is the culmination of months of work, you
yeah,
know? Um, and if you perform a piece 10 times in a row, or 10 times, spread out over 2 weeks, it's going to get better every
yeah,
time.
yeah,
And then you will at some point feel empowered, like you're in the flow. Okay, I can handle this. And I didn't know any of those things in school. I didn't really know any of those things until I was studying about kind of the effects of adrenaline and how we react to it, how we can get used to it. Chatter, or like one time I was in Iowa, I was kind of on a little performance tour for a chamber music group, and we played the same program like 7 times. And I think I'd never done that before. I mean, orchestra, yes, like in the pit, but when I could be heard. And it was
hmm,
like, I got to this point where I could play the violin.
yeah,
Not to say that
yeah,
it was perfect, but I wasn't outside of my body. I was in my body.
yeah,
And so there's, just to talk about it honestly, like this is how it works. This is the scientific. This is how your body gets used to it. This is how you do intervention training. This is how you work on your chatter. This is and no amount of practice in the practice room is the same as practicing performing.
yeah. Yeah. I like to compare it between if you're going to compete in open water, but you only practice in the pool, then you're not training for the accurate
Hmm.
context.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If people are listening to this on the podcast, they can't see what the people watching on YouTube would see, which is me grinning to ear when you're talking, because there's so many things you say that are either things I say or things I do. I think we have
Yeah.
so much in common. You were talking about that idea of a draft, and that's something I say to students and clients all the time. It's the first draft. It's the ongoing draft, you know.
Hmm.
Another thing that you were talking about is that recording technique. I just recorded a podcast episode about this a couple months ago, actually, the record, reflect, refine, which is, I like how you describe it, the sandwich recording
Hmm.
technique, which is very similar, if not exactly the same as what I was explaining in this. We really have to meet, you and me. We're going to have
Yeah.
so much to talk about. Um, Susanna, you were talking about that importance of joy in practice and that scientific approach. There's so much we can learn from you. What would you say would be one of your um, most, like something you would really recommend for the listeners as they approach practice to make it more mindful and more efficient?
Um, it's a big subject. Um, I think purposely cultivating efficiency, empowerment, and joy.
Hmm.
Those three. Now they're very, very broad, right? But I think that's important, and recognizing why you need those. And you can be out of balance for a while, but not for too long, or it will hurt you in one of the other categories, right? So if you're super efficient and you never feel any joy, eventually you will not want to practice anymore, or
Yeah.
you will really dread it, right? If you only stop, for example, if you're super efficient, you never allow yourself to goof off in the practice room, you only leave the practice room when you are completely worn out and maybe disgusted with yourself, you just can't handle it anymore, which is when I used to leave the practice room. I just couldn't
Mhm.
take it anymore. That would be when I left. Your relationship with practice becomes toxic. Like, we know from research that the way that you end an experience tends to be the way that you remember that experience.
Mm.
So if you can stop practicing before you get to that super frustrated part, maybe have a little 10-minute goof off time at the end, or play through things slowly where you feel accomplished and in control, then leave. You are more likely to want to come back willingly, more likely to be open and relaxed. And we know that being a relaxed player does like wonders for sound, no matter what instrument you play.
Yeah.
Um, so and the same with empowerment, like it's good to record yourself. It's highly efficient, but tips for cultivating empowerment, for example, in recording, might be like, for me, it's I stop recording at least a week before I get on stage. I just say, done there, been that. I need to get in the zone, because if I continue to nitpick like that, my inner dialogue is not great, right? The recording sandwiches. Every once in a while, getting out a mic, or borrowing a mic if you don't have one that's of a higher quality, or listening back through speakers instead of just, on your little phone,
Mhm.
because that is not your sound. And it's great for working on pitch and phrasing and all these things, but that is not how you sound. And and even a good mic, that's not how you sound. You sound more wonderful than that. But you need to every once in a while hear a little flavor of the true beauty of your sound,
Mhm.
so that the impression that you're forming of yourself as you're being highly efficient isn't one that will drain your sense of empowerment. Empowerment is important not just for the stage, but think about um, all the ways that we get stronger: asking somebody for advice, playing for somebody that you've never played for before, um, scoping out a new teacher, taking on something that could be risky, right? Playing in public when really you don't need to, it's truly optional. You need to feel empowered in order to do those things, right? And so doing things and not keeping an eye on empowerment can be very dangerous, because you're actually going to put the lid on certain types of learning that require you to have kind of daring behavior. So even though these are kind of general buckets, I really think they're very important, and one kind of has a relationship with the other. Some players are naturally balanced more towards one than the other, and I would just say, to cultivate a little balance. The other big thing is that, I think of us having four categories of practice. Training. In sports, they call it training. We call it technique. I like to call it training. I don't know why, just because I'm so in the sports world.
Yeah.
Those are the just general conditioning of the body, the finger patterns, anything that we want to go in the deep vault so that we can access it more easily. Um, Repertoire, of course. Mental practice, which is really working on our imagination. um, and performance practice that we already talked about. Those are the four categories, and I I think a lot of people how do I say this? And I used to do this too. I used to be all like rep and technique and no mental and no performance practice.
Mhm.
And then I was surprised that I was not a great performer. Well, I hadn't been really practicing that category, right?
Yeah.
Um, if you think, or I wasn't actually also very musical. Like, if you strip the definition of musician down to, because I know you have, all sorts of instrumentalists and singers that listen to the podcast, but I think of a musician as somebody who imagines sound and somebody who moves to create sound.
Mm, that's a beautiful definition.
It's like just like, as simple as it can be. So when we're practicing, we should either be working on our imagination, singing, phrasing, listening, score study, marking in characters. I don't know, it's foggy outside here in this piece of music, right? Working on our imagination. How are we imagining this to sound? Or we are working on our movement. And just for people to be clear about that, I think sometimes helps, because I tell my students all the time, we are not here to learn notes. Learning notes is a byproduct of, we are here to either become better imaginers or better movers. And by, movement has weight, it has speed, right? It has sequence. Does the finger go down first, or does the bow draw first, right? Or maybe it's happening at the same time. Movement has ergonomics, right? Am I moving in a circular kind of way, or am I stiff, or am I working at angles? So if we're working on movement, then there's a whole category of things that we can do that are very specific, or we're working on our imagination, but we're not learning notes, even though sometimes, of course, we're learning notes as a way of getting there.
What a beautiful answer. I feel like all I need to do now is put a bow on top of this and hit publish.
I don't know.
Cool.
It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of, like, it's a lot of little categories, but I find that words and expectations help. They help me
Hmm.
find, okay, I don't really know what I want to say here. I'm going to work on my imagination. I'm going to just work
Yeah.
on the phrasing. It's not a waste of time. Listening to music is practice. It's not, oh, I should be practicing. You are practicing.
Yeah.
You're practicing your audiation. You're practicing, getting ideas, and then the movement thing also, like, we can parse it down much, much further, but I find it helps students, like, if I ask them, how have you practiced this? And, they say, well, I've done it slow. And I'm like, good, excellent, that's great. How else have you practiced it? And then that's where usually starts to trickle, and I'm like, well, did you do some pattern training? Meaning, did you take this pattern, let's say this bowing or this rhythm, and put it in a scale? Because you know a scale very well. Your brain already knows that scale. So now you're going to take that pattern with the scale. And we know that if you attach something new to something you already know, your body and your brain will learn faster. We know that. It's scientifically proven. So, like, did you use pattern training? Or did you work on separation training? Meaning, only the right hand, only the left hand, maybe only speaking the text, only tapping the rhythm. That's separation training. Like, there are all these categories of training that people can use, and they should. Like, that's how we learn the most efficiently, is to kind of give the body one thing at a time, really exaggerate it, change how we move or how our brain perceives something, then move on.
Hmm.
So breaking down is not a failure. It's
Yeah.
it's the path to success. But it's true that if you only break down stuff and you never get a complete inventory, like, that also doesn't work, right? That's
Yeah.
what's so tricky about being a musician, is like balancing all these. Be very nitpicky,
Yeah.
be
It's a,
hard on yourself, and then, like, be an optimist, believe in yourself, self manifest. It's like, okay. um
I like this word that you've mentioned several times, balance. And what you offered to us was so complete and holistic an approach. I love that. What you just said to at the end reminded me of one of my favorite quote from Gretchen Rubin, and I will paraphrase it because I don't remember
Love
the
her.
exact word that she uses, but I love everything that she creates. But she says the opposite of an ultimate truth is also true.
Yes.
And yes, you need to break things down and you need to approach it as a whole. You need to chunk it and play the whole thing. And you need to
Yes.
practice really hard and then forget about all of it and let go 100%.
Yes, and they're all true. That's a great way of putting it. The opposite truth. And I think sometimes we cultivate one truth so much because we're afraid of a negative opposite. You
Mm,
know, if I play the whole thing, oh, I'm one of those hacks, who just runs through their stuff and never breaks it down. There's something that we're afraid of being.
mm,
Um, but it's that juxtaposition of and knowing as you move towards performance, you'll be doing more of something and less of something else, right? You're going to be less navel gazy and nitpicky and more holistic and whole training, right? I'm gonna or for me, I'm gonna stop recording myself. Right. I know people who record dress rehearsals of a recital and then go home and listen to it. Do you know what I mean? I admire it so much because I feel like to have that and to be that focused on, hey, what is that final thing that I'm going to dedicate myself to, that mantra that you need. I just, after doing it several times, I had to learn that for me, I had to push that exercise a week before.
yeah.
So like I'll do a whole run through, I'll record it, all that stuff, I'll take notes, I'll listen, but I just couldn't do it right before. Or sometimes I used to, for auditions, some of my more successful auditions, I only practice scales backstage, which is kind of weird and not what I would recommend to a lot of people. Like I would say, go through some of your excerpts at least slowly, but there was something about that space
Yeah.
that allowed me to stay positive and empowered. And that's the other thing, besides having all these things, like you need to be critical, you need to be confident, right? You need to nitpick, you need to do the whole thing, you need to forgive and forget, you need to listen acutely. um, there is also, like, everybody's different.
Yeah.
uh, and I think that's why what you do, your coaching, I think it brings a whole nother level of power to these things, to these concepts, because you get to know your clients and you can see everybody is a little different, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like, if Susanna is the type of person who just gets super critical by listening to a recording of herself the night before a concert and then holds back, then maybe she's a person who has to stop doing that a certain time before, because
Yeah.
we all bring our own inborn personalities and biases
Oh,
and all that stuff.
yeah. And that's what that idea that I think you touched on earlier of self-trust in that process is so important. You talk about, this is a draft. We're experimenting. And I think we need to give ourselves room to play and literally play the instrument, play out our imagination, as you said, but also have fun. So have this playful thing. But many of us look for all of the answers and the permissions outside of ourselves. And then I think at some point we can just take a deep breath and say, okay, I read this, I heard this from this teacher, or I heard this from this coach, saw this on this YouTube video. Now that we shut down everything, what am I going to explore today, experiment with, try in what works for me? What you were just saying.
Right, because we're never done learning.
Mhm.
Never done learning and experimenting and being curious. And um
Eh,
I've learned things again from sports where I'll see a coach do something or I'll see an exercise and I'm like, I wonder how that would work, like for violin. Like,
mm,
what is that same concept? And then I do it and I'm like, oh my God, so brilliant. Like,
yeah.
why didn't I ever think about that? Because I wasn't taught that. And that sense of exploration, and that everybody is different.
Yeah. I know a very vivid memory for me. This was really early on my journey of mindful practice and everything that subsequently became Mind Over Finger. I was preparing for an audition and really in the thick of the practice and the thick of the agony, let's call it that way, and had a yoga class, went to this yoga class. And to this day, I still hear the voice of the teacher, his tone, all of it. We were in one of the warrior variations. I don't remember which one exactly. But he kept saying, let go, feel where the stretch is or feel where the tension is and let go, let go. And as I'm standing there in this posture and I'm hearing his voice, let go, let go. In that instant, I had exactly what you're just talking about, this idea of that was the problem in what I was practicing today.
Mhm.
It's the letting go. So what would that look like if I go home and practice and apply this same principle? Now, technically, I don't know how it related precisely,
Yeah,
but
but it's something in the brain. You can take
yeah,
that general feeling,
yeah.
with
And
you.
for me, that was a really profound experience because I did go home, probably showered, and then practice and tried to experiment and see what does that look like for me in my practice today to this idea of letting go. And it was such a powerful shift in how the process went after that. And I could say that it was probably a pivoting point in my musical journey where I realized,
Yeah, yoga was for me as well.
mhm,
Absolutely. I mean, when I first started yoga, I was in my 20s. I had a surgery, and I after the surgery I gained a lot of weight, so it was just like, oh, I need to exercise so I can be less fat. But it was it it changed my playing completely because I'd never practiced any kind of self-love or awareness. And I used to cry at the end of sessions. I mean, we would go in Shavasana and I would just have tears just streaming down my face, for weeks actually, because
mhm,
I had so much, I had held so much and was pushing so hard, practice 6 hours a day. And, I'd have a practice log, and it was all about the amount of time that I put into it. And I think I needed that ruthless inner dialogue because I was afraid that if I didn't have that, I wouldn't do enough work.
right,
So the inner dialogue to me was what I thought I needed to get the work done. Um, and now I know, like, you can practice half an hour and have some transformative change, and you can practice 6 hours and have absolutely no change. you
mm,
know um,
yes,
I don't think all of my 6 hours were wasted when I was younger, but I think a lot of them were. And I know that I did a lot of damage to my body. I have a really messed up neck, I have a bad shoulder, blah blah blah. It's better now that I'm not playing full time, that I'm kind of playing and teaching and doing other things. But um, that was not necessary. But I didn't know any other way, you
right,
know. Um,
yeah.
so
Susanna, I wish that we could keep going for hours and hours. Usually at this point, I would take my clients. I would take my guests through the rapid fire questions. But for you, I had a different idea in mind. There's one of these questions I want to ask you, and then there's a couple that I want to ask, but in a modified way. So I am curious. You've shared just so many gems of wisdom today. I hope that the listeners listen to this episode many times. I also hope they go on your website. You have fantastic resources there, many articles that you've linked in there on all of these wonderful topics. You have a wonderful YouTube channel and then, of course, some books. But what would be for you one quality, and you've shared many already, but maybe one quality that people could bring with them in the practice room, or maybe a habit that would be really helpful for them to develop?
um, one, if I had to pick one, I think it would be exaggeration.
Mm,
Um, so, if, let's say, somebody is battling tension, if they get to that point where they're like, this keeps coming up over and over again, my teachers have said it, other people have said it, I know it, you know what I mean? To make everything about releasing tension, to be willing to be bad at everything else that you practice, to really go deep into this one concept and dedicate themselves to it completely.
Mm.
If it's confidence, you know, um, maybe playing too loud, doing some power poses, like go, what would that look like, you know, by any means necessary. Because I find and this has been true for me too, is that we like to nibble on our problems and we like to not make a hierarchy, but that's not how breakthroughs happen. Like you need to create a
Mm.
lot of space. And the breakthroughs that I have had in my life, in my playing in particular, and also in my persona, have really led me sort of to believe like exaggeration is the way. I'll give you an example. When I was at Kneisel Hall, um, in the summer, I don't know, I think it was after my sophomore year or something, I had chamber music coaching with Ko Iwasaki, a cellist there who's awesome. And, you know, we start and 5 minutes in, he's like, what's Susanna, what's happening with your vibrato? And I had this, at the time, I had this like kind of very large, like you could drive a truck through it, like, you know, vibrato. And I said, oh yeah, I'm working on it. You know, I changed from wrist to arm and blah, you know, I had all these words. And he said, oh, okay, well, by next week, can you be done stopping, you know, working on it? Can you just have worked on it and like, you just have a great vibrato? And I was like, okay, sure, I'll try. And he said, no, you know, like Yoda, try not like do or do, right? Next week we come. So I worked on my vibrato a little bit, but I also learned chamber music and I was working on my solo stuff, all this stuff. We came back, we started playing. Very quickly, it was like, stop, everyone. Susanna, I thought we had a conversation about, you know, vibrato. It's like, yeah, I worked on it. And he said, that's no. Okay, let me just be totally honest with you. He said, you have very nice things in your playing. You know, you have nice pitch, you have, you know, nice bow technique and sound. And, you know, that vibrato is a deal breaker. You will never get a job if you
Mm.
vibrate like that. So why don't you just take a week out of your life and just double down and deal with it? So next week when I will see you, you will have a very good vibrato. Maybe not your final vibrato, but you know. And of course I was sort of mortified and like, you know, inspired, but you know, I asked every single person I knew what vibrato exercises they had, how they approach it, how do they feel? Is it more here? Is it a relaxation thing? I mean, we had 52 people at summer camp, and I'm pretty sure I talked to every single one of them. And I let my other stuff drop and I was all in, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of those vibrato exercises that I learned that summer are now on my YouTube channel. And like the, you know, 12 ways to practice vibrato, it was from that experience, right? Because I really had to uh, hustle down. Or a friend of mine, after an audition, I asked her, you know, what's wrong with my playing? It was a little bit, you know, unfair of me, but she's a bestie. So I was like, tell me if you could change one thing in my playing. She, oh no, your playing's fine. And I was like, no, I need you to tell me like the one thing. Like if you were talking to somebody else, she plays well, but this one thing. And she's like, okay, well, I just kind of feel like sometimes, like I was like, say it, just say it. And she said, it sounds like it sounds like you're not, like you don't have any balls when you play.
Mm.
And I was like, okay. She said, I'm not even talking about volume. I'm just talking about like, you know, get to it. And so I put earplugs in both ears for 10 days and only played with earplugs in because I knew this was psychological
Yeah.
and I needed to kind of, you know, and I extra articulated and I played too loud and so like those kinds of things, I think exaggerating. So if you're a person who always blows through stuff, spend 10 days breaking down way more than you ever want to.
Mm.
If you're a person who only breaks things down, and you know this, like me, I tend to do that. You need to do more holistic things. Play through stuff, even if it's too slow, even if you have to modify in some other way. So
Yeah.
that because everybody's different, right? Everybody has different issues, but I think the solution is yes, patience, but exaggeration can really really help.
I love
It was a
that.
little bit too long, but
No, but what a powerful answer. It's absolutely, I think, very impactful for me as I listen to it right now, and I'm
yeah,
sure for the
yeah, it has
listeners as
been.
well.
I mean, I try to live by it, you know. I try to, and for some reason, 10 is always my magic number. I think because it's easy. It's like when I was playing the chaconne, I was having all sorts of memory problems and confidence problems, and so I was literally like, I will play for 10 people
Yeah,
by memory. And I was like, you get to number 10, and you're like, okay,
I can
it's
do
going
it.
to be okay. It's not going to be perfect, but I can get myself out of a jam.
The analogy that
So
comes to mind is it's like have your movie montage moment where you just go all in. You piece that together like
yeah,
a movie with some great rock music in the background, and you come out at the end having conquered it.
because those habits are they're pretty deep, right? I mean, something like tension, or let's say your arms aren't coordinated. I mean, that's been in the bank and the deep vault for a long time. So to try and change that takes very purposeful, exaggerated work. Like if your
Mm,
left hand and right hand aren't um, synced,
yeah.
often, an exercise might be like left hand plays, right hand plays, left hand sets, right hand plays. Because you have to teach the brain, hey, left hand actually has to be first. You cannot beat the bow. And so in order to train the brain to understand that difference, you might have to practice those two things very far apart for the brain to understand that this movement sequence is this way, not this way.
Hmm.
Um, that's just an example.
Yeah. A couple other questions I ask in the rapid fire question are usually what's your favorite tool in the practice room or a book you would recommend. But for you, what I would love to hear is tell us more about these fabulous tools that you've created, the book that you have out there, the practice journal, and also this app that you have. I'm sure the listeners would love to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. So the journal is Practisma Practice Journal. For those that are watching on YouTube, I'm showing it. 16 weeks of efficiency, empowerment, and joy. It's for all musicians, and it's basically it's a journal tracking space where you can keep track of your practice. But more than anything, it is designed to lead to some new habits and discoveries. So every week has a reflection prompt, and every week has uh like an activity, kind of a daring prompt. This week, play for somebody, this week, record yourself, right? Make recording sandwiches, some of the stuff I've already talked about. Or this week, spend the first 10 minutes of every practice session um, doing mental study, either score study, singing, or listening to something. Um, because I found that, just giving people information is nice, but if you can kind of lead them through a journey where they don't have to make a lot of decisions and they just follow the prompts, but by doing so, they discover a lot. Um, that takes away some of that decision fatigue, and people have found it really um, I don't know, good companionship and good reason to spur um this we haven't talked about. Like, I kind of have this like teaching mantra about what am I trying to teach my students. It's like CROTO for short: creativity, resilience, optimism, discipline, and organization.
Hmm.
But most of us are naturally good at one and
Yeah.
maybe very weak at another. And so the journal in a way is supposed to help people by it has very different prompts, all throughout, so that like one week you're gonna have to be more creative, one week you're gonna have to be more disciplined, right?
Hmm.
um, to kind of hone those dispositions in everybody, to kind of round people out. And then it's kind of dedicated to empowerment. Write a heart every time you have a breakthrough, write down what you accomplished so that people can see their wins. It's sort of a culmination of a lot of that work that I was doing
Hmm.
with my students. And that's available. It's available on my website, practisma.com. Shameless plug, but it's also available through um, only independent retailers, no Amazon. That's a whole nother story that we can get into some other time. But Flute Center of New York, string shops, performers music in Chicago has it. Like there are various places you can find it. And then the app, that's a little thing that was a pandemic project with a friend of mine. It came out of the research app that I had done at the university, but there was one portion in the research app that students totally loved in the human trials, which was um, they could have the camera open, and anytime they wanted to play something back, they would just have to swipe the
Mhm.
screen and it would instantly play back like the last 30 seconds. And that little portion of the app they totally loved. So we made kind of a standalone. It's called Clipsa with a Z. It's a camera, with sound, and if it's open, if you want to save something you just did, you tap the screen, or if you want an instant replay, you swipe the screen. With the idea that we're taking away the psychological hurdle of actually turning the recording device on. And it actually, the swipe thing came from podcasts. When you listen to a podcast and you need to hear something again, you hit
Mhm.
that little backwards button. It's kind of inspired by that.
Mhm. That's a great
So it's
idea.
iOS only, but that's been a fun little toy. And I think people either use it, it's interesting, people use it for practice. Some people practice with it like obsessively. They just have it open and then just, swipe to see what they did. And then other people use it for social media posting.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
instead of having to take so many takes, do you know what I mean? They just like let it run. And if they captured something that's decent, they just tap the screen so they have it. But whatever floats your boat.
That's wonderful. Susanna, I'm going to put all of these links in the show notes with your website and the Practisma website, all of this YouTube channel. So if the listeners want to go and explore more of your wonderful content, they can find you there. And I hope they do. I hope they listen to everything you shared today at least twice and take some notes because this was absolutely so powerful, everything that you shared
Don't
with
get too
us.
serious, y'all. Have some fun out there.
And I'm just so grateful that you shared your journey with us today and your contribution to the classical music world and the music world at large is just wonderful and such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. It's so nice to speak to you too. I look forward to our in-person meeting so I can hear more about what you're doing and how because you're also like me, like a researcher, and then putting things into practice. You know what I mean? Helping people feel, I don't know, more empowered, more normal, more. Do you know what I mean? Making the journey better
Yeah.
for them because we're worth it. We're worth it.
Yes.
Like we want people to feel good.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
we
like
should.
happy, fulfilled, at home musicians is my goal.
Yeah, I like that term. Yeah, at home. It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Susanna. I'm
Thanks.
gonna stop the recording.